Hello, my name is Hans-Peter Zimmermann. I'm appearing in this video primarily because I'm a satisfied and successful user of the Mars 3 radionics system. This is Harald Rauer, who is the owner and director of Bruce Koppen Laboratories in Europe. He is the developer of this radionics device. In this video, we'd like to show you how the Mars 3 radionics system works. The video is intended, on the one hand, for people who've just bought the system and don't like reading manuals, but who want to get results quickly. On the other hand, it is of course also intended for therapists who've been toying with the idea of buying the system and who'd like some help in making the decision. The best way of coming to a decision is to see the system in action. Part 1. I would like to achieve results immediately. Part 2. I would like to find out about the other functions. Part 3. I am a professional radionics practitioner. The video is based on the assumption that you know something about radionics and have some ideas about how radionics works. You'll find more information about radionics on my website, www.hpz.com. On the website, you'll also find a podcast that I've produced. You can, of course, also find more information at www.koppen.de. Here are some addresses of a few other interesting radionics websites. First of all, Harald Rauer is going to show you the components of the Mars 3 and how to put them together. Then you'll find out how you can carry out your first treatment within the space of 10 minutes. The Mars 3 radionics system is made up of two components. The hardware, which has a number of input, output and control functions, and the software, which you can install on any standard PC running Windows XP. You connect the unit, the hardware, to the PC using a USB cable. Plug one end of the USB cable into the back of the unit and the other end into a free USB port on your computer. It's important to remember to use the same USB port that you used during the installation every time you connect the unit to your PC. Otherwise, the system may not function correctly. Switch the unit on at the back. An initialization routine starts up, which involves initializing the card reader and checking the basic functions of the unit. Once the initialization routine is finished, the Mars 3 startup graphic appears on the display. Use the software to operate all the functions of the unit. Start the software by double-clicking on the icon on the desktop. The program starts connecting the PC with the hardware, which can take a few minutes. A window appears with information about the status of the connection. When the computer and the unit have been successfully connected, the hardware's serial number appears at the bottom of the screen. Now you can start using the software. The program is made up of 4 modules. There's the Patients module, where you can enter all your patient data. The second module is the database, which contains all the information that you need for testing, including all the organs, viruses, bacteria, fungi, burdens, homeopathic remedies, and so on. The third module is the Test Wizard, where you carry out the analysis. Finally, there's the Projections module, where you can set up the patient's treatment. Let's start with the patient's module. In radionics, we work primarily with patient witnesses or samples, in other words, blood or hair. If I want to add a new patient, first of all, I need a blood or hair sample. I have here a person's hair sample. Of course, I won't tell you their name at this point. I put the hair sample into the unit's input cup, and in the software, I choose the Add New Patient function. First of all, the information in the patient witness is scanned in. This means recording the radiation from the patient witness for 10 seconds and storing it in the database, together with the patient's name, date of birth, and so on. I'll start the scanning process now, and it'll last for about 10 seconds. Once the scanning process is finished, I can enter the rest of the patient data. The minimum amount of information required is the patient's gender, first name and last name. I'll use the name Felix Sample and save the data I've entered. When I add a new patient, this person automatically becomes the selected patient who undergoes the tests. If I want to search for a patient in my existing database, I simply enter the patient's last name. A list of the patients in the database with that name is displayed, and I can choose the patient I want by double-clicking on the name. Now we'll go back to Felix Sample. I double-click on the name to select Felix Sample as my patient. Now I can start testing the patient. In theory, I can take the patient witness out of the input cup now, because I've saved all the information on the computer. So that you understand the concept, first of all, I'd like to show you how you can run manual tests and which template you should use for analyzing the patient. I'll use a single-handed rod. You can, of course, use any other test procedures such as kinesiology, RAC or EAV testing. In the second part of the video, we'll show you how you can use the system to carry out this part of the process automatically. By testing with the tensor, we've identified that we need the burdens template. I put the template in my virtual test honeycomb, and then I go on testing to find out which other templates I need. The next template I need is the organ test template, and I put that in my test honeycomb too. We'll cut the process short at this point, and I'll show you the functionality using just the burdens and organ test templates. I click on the button to start the VIBA generator, and the system produces a results list on the right-hand side of the window, where I can see the values from the test for the individual parameters. You can see that this results list is fairly comprehensive. The values are in the range -10 to +10. In our experience, the only values which are relevant for the therapeutic treatment of patients are those in the range -7 to -10 or +7 to +10. That's why there's a trigger function, which I can use to delete all the other irrelevant values. I'll set the trigger to 7. You can, of course, also find out this setting using the tensor. Next, I delete all the values outside the trigger range. You can see that the results list immediately becomes a lot clearer. The negative values here represent an underfunction or a chronic degenerative condition. The positive values represent an overfunction or an inflammatory condition. You could refer to this as hyperergy, in other words, too much energy, or hypoergy, too little energy. I'll show you now how you can turn this pathological information into treatment information by carrying out a potency test. This means finding out the homeopathic potency we need to give to the individual test values, so that we can trigger a healing response in the patient's body. First, we'll save the test as main test 1. Then I'll start the potency test. From the Sessions tab, I open the session that I've just saved, put the entire results back into my virtual test honeycomb, and let the system identify the potencies. This means that I've now identified the healing information that the patient needs, together with the potency. I can now move on to broadcasting the patient on the basis of this information. I'll save this test with the name Potency Test 1. Now I move to the Projections module. From the Potency Tests tab, I open the session that I've just saved and put it in my virtual test honeycomb. There are several ways of broadcasting the patient. First of all, there are so-called EECS cards. These are magnetic memory cards which have been specially developed by Bruce Copen. They can be used to store therapeutic information, and patients can carry a card either in their shirt pocket or in their handbag. The second option is to produce homeopathic remedies or homeopathized remedies either in globules or in liquid carrier substances. The third option is the typical radionics method of broadcasting, in other words, remote treatment. And last but not least, we can also treat the patient directly using hand electrodes which we can connect to the unit. We'll talk more about this in the second part of the video. Ideally, you should carry out a test at this point to find out which treatment method is best for the patient. I could use the tensor again or carry out an automatic test with longer-lasting results. In this case, the tensor would tell me that radionic broadcasting or remote treatment is the best form of therapy for this patient. I've filled my virtual honeycomb with the information, and now I simply click on the icon to set up the remote treatment process. Mars 3 has two basic options. One is instant broadcasting, and the other is future broadcasting. In future broadcasting, I set up the job for the patient and choose the periods during which the broadcasting will take place. The system then runs the job in the background. First of all, I'll give the job a name, in this case, Broadcast 1. Then I'll choose when the broadcast will start. The default is today's date. I can use the tensor again to find out when the broadcasting should finish. In this case, I'll assume that it will finish after a week. I have the option of setting a pausing time. This means that a broadcast can last, for example, for 20 minutes, then there'll be an interval of 4 hours, and then the broadcast will run for 20 minutes, and so on. So here I enter the pausing time, and once again I can use the tensor to test this. In this example, I'll choose 4 hours, and as I just mentioned, the actual length of the broadcast, which in this case is 20 minutes. Then I have the option of choosing on which weekdays the broadcast will be made. The whole system must be switched on for a broadcast. In other words, both the Mars unit and the computer. I have the option here of choosing a number of different projection periods. I can broadcast during the day between 8 AM and 8 PM. I can also broadcast day and night, in other words, for 24 hours round the clock. And I can broadcast at night, from 8 in the evening to 8 in the morning. Of course, you also have the option of setting your own projection periods. For example, if your working day is from 9 to 5, you can set this to be your projection period. In this case, the broadcasts will only run during this time. As I mentioned, the computer must be switched on during this period. It's important that your system's energy-saving function is set so that it prevents the computer from going into standby mode during this period. You can switch the monitor off or use a screensaver, but the system itself must not go into standby mode. I can now save these settings, and I can see in the overview that the patient will be broadcast for 20 minutes starting at 9 a.m. There'll then be a 4-hour pause. The patient will be broadcast again from 1:20 to 1:40, and there'll be another 4-hour pause. Because I've set the end of the broadcasting period to be 5 p.m, the patient will be broadcast twice a day for a period of 20 minutes each time. You can tell when the broadcast is started by the automatic timer because the blue bar changes color to red, and at the side of the screen the small radio tower starts to flash. This shows that the patient is currently being broadcast. In the first part of the video, we've shown you the basic functions of the Köppen Mars 3 radionics system. We'd now like to go into more detail in some areas. I'll start with managing patient data. The patient data function of the Mars 3 helps you to manage the data which you identify using the system. But it can also help you to manage all your practice routines. As soon as you've added a patient, which you found out about in the first part, you can enter more details in the patient window. These include the patient's full address, phone number, fax number, and email address. If you have email software on your PC, you can send emails directly from the patient's module. This means that you can send test reports to your patients by email. There's also another tab for additional information. The patient's blood group, place of birth and date of birth, for example. You can also enter the patient's health insurance details and other information about the patient's family, such as whether he or she has children, and if so, what their names are. There's also a field for the patient's medical history, where you can fill out a questionnaire during your first consultation with the patient. For example, you can note down what the patient expects from the consultation, what the patient believes the problems are, and so on. There's also a field where you can enter your own notes, for example, about what measures you recommend for the patient in addition to the radionic treatment, including nutrition and nutritional supplements or other types of therapy which your colleagues offer. And of course, there's a history field, where you can see a list of everything that you've done using the software. You can also print this list out. The system records the history automatically. If you've stored data relating to a number of patients in the database, you also have the option of searching for patient data using a range of search criteria, including the patient's first name, last name, place of residence, and so on. You can then select the data for analysis. Next, I'd like to show you the advanced analysis options of the Köppen Mars 3. In the main test, we can enter a number of different settings, which are of particular importance for advanced radionics. For example, clinical radionics, as represented by the TML Berghoff analysis. There are 3 types of settings. Firstly, there is the level. Here you can test different layers of the body or test to find out which layer of the body the blockage is located on. There are 12 different layers or levels in total. Secondly, you have the option of changing the measurement scale. Here we're referring to so-called range types. There are 3 settings to choose from. Firstly, the classical overfunction-underfunction test, which we used in the first part of the video. Secondly, the percentage scale from 0% to 100%. And thirdly, pure neutral positive testing. This is particularly useful if, for example, you want to test using external processes, such as kinesiology, and you want to find out in which areas you need to make a preliminary selection. In the first part, we mentioned that you can use the Mars 3 without a tensor. I'd now like to show you how you can use the test wizard and a so-called pre-test to find out which parameters of the Mars 3 need to be tested for this patient. In our database, we have more than 10,000 different parameters. The pre-test will give you a very brief, concise overview of the parameters you need to analyze in more depth. Choose the pre-test template and start the analysis by clicking on the VIBA generator. On the right-hand side of the window, you'll see a results list. The system tells you that for this patient, for example, you should test the acupuncture points and run an allergy test and a color tuning test. To run the acupuncture point and allergy tests, you choose the main test human template over here. We've already described the remainder of the process in part 1. I'd like to look now in more detail at color tuning, because color tuning is a unique and exclusive module of the Köppen Mars 3 radionics system. It was developed by Radionics expert Hermann Grosser and integrated into our software. You start the module by clicking on the color tuning icon in the test wizard. First of all, I'd like to explain the fundamental concept behind color tuning. It's a color and tone therapy program which you can use for virtually projecting acoustic tones that have been assigned to colors onto specific body zones. You see a representation of the patient. His body is divided into a total of 66 zones. On the left-hand side of the window, you can see the matrix containing the 12-part chromatic color tone range. Each color represents a tone in the chromatic C major scale, which is repeated over a total of 12 octaves, giving a color and tone matrix with 144 fields. The first stage of the therapeutic analysis is to find out which of the patient's zones are blocked. This part of the process is, of course, completely automatic. All you need to do is click on the VIBA zone button, and the system will automatically identify the zones where the patient has a blockage. The result appears as a grey area on the picture of the patient. In this case, you can see that the patient has a blockage at the back of the head and in the left ankle joint. In the second stage, you identify which colors you need to use to remove the blockage. To do this, click on the VIBA color button, and the VIBA generator will automatically identify the colors needed to remove these blocked zones. The zone on the picture of the patient will turn a slightly darker grey, and the color and tone combination will be shown as a circle in the matrix. If you click on the zone at the back of the patient's head, you'll see the color and tone combination which has been identified for this zone. The results produced in this way allow for amazing interpretations of the patient's psyche. V.V. Raupak has written a book about this called the Chakra Aura System, which enables an in-depth psychological interpretation of the patient to be made, based on the allocation of the 66 body zones to the 7 primary energy centers or chakras. You can now broadcast the zones with the color and tone combinations you've identified. To do this, you need to move to broadcast mode. Enter the time settings, which we described in part 1, and then you can start the therapy.
Und kann dann eben die Therapie starten. Und Sie hören es nun, Es wird
The tone and the colour are projected onto the relevant body zone.
auf die entsprechende
Although the tones are audible, the projection process is radionic and uses either remote broadcasting or hand electrodes, which can be connected to the back of the Mars 3 and come into direct contact with the patient.
direkten Patientenkontakt. Es gibt natürlich auch die Möglichkeit,
Of course, you also have the option of programming the broadcast into the multi-broadcaster, which means that you can treat several patients remotely at the same time.
eine weitere Spezialität
Another special feature of color tuning is a collection of more than 250 therapy programs that you can use to broadcast specific patient symptoms directly.
balancieren kann. Wir haben Programme
We have programs covering everything from abscesses to gingivitis. You can easily access these programs from the Programs module.
kann,
Let's look, for example, at the abscess program.
den Abszess und dann die Balance
You start the broadcast process, and using the predefined program, the zones are broadcast directly with the specific colors.
in Farben direkt balanciert. Die im
You can, of course, save the results of the color tuning process. To do this, click on the Save button and enter a name for the results, as described in Part 1. For example, in this case, CT1.
T1. Dann kann ich diese gespeicherte Sitzung auch wieder im Modul Projektion aufrufen und zur Therapie verwenden. Sie können natürlich alle Ergebnisse
You can access the saved session from the Projections module and use it for therapeutic purposes.
haben Sie sogar die Möglichkeit,
You can also print out all the different results reports.
passen mit Ihrem
If you have Microsoft Word on your PC, you can even customize your printouts by including your own logo and address, or by adding your own details to the results which you want to inform the patient about.
einfügen. Es wird jedoch empfohlen, dass man
However, we recommend that you don't simply hand over the results report to the patient in the form of a laboratory test, but instead that you discuss the results with the patient and explain in detail what they mean.
was diese Ergebnisse im Einzelnen bedeuten. Ich möchte Ihnen nun zum Ende des
To
zweiten
round off the second part of the video, I'd now like to show you the other therapy options available with the Mars 3.
Wir haben ja im
In
ersten
the first part of the video, we introduced the concept of the EECS card. These cards are particularly useful in cases where you've identified that the patient is suffering from geopathological interference zones and electrosmog. You can imprint the relevant information on the card, and patients can put the card on their desk, in front of the computer, or under their bed, for example.
oder am Schlafplatz
Another option, as we mentioned in Part 1, is for patients to carry the card around with them.
diese Karten bei sich trägt. Um die Karte mit Informationen zu prägen, wähle ich
To imprint the information on the card, first select the information that you want to store on the card. You then put the information in the virtual honeycomb and click on the icon that copies the rates onto the EECS card.
auf die ECS-Karte. Das System fordert mich nun
The
auf,
system then prompts you to insert the card into the unit, and the copying process starts.
danach starte ich dann den Kopiervorgang. Wird zunächst der Karteninhalt gelöscht,
The existing content of the card is deleted, and the information you selected is stored on the card.
Vorgangs wird mir durch
A beeping sound indicates that the process is finished, and you can take the card out of the unit and give it to the patient.
Wenn Sie zum Beispiel wieder durch Testen mit dem
If, for example, you found by testing with the tensor that a certain remedy should be produced for this patient, you can put a neutral carrier substance in the unit's output cup.
des Gerätes stellen. Wir haben, wie gesagt, die Auswahl
You've already selected the necessary information. Now you click on the icon for imprinting the globules and select the imprint function.
und gehe hier auf die Funktion Prägen. Dann werden alle Raten
All the rates in your virtual honeycomb will be imprinted on the neutral carrier substance. This takes about 10 seconds.
Dies dauert auch wieder circa 10 Sekunden und nach dem Ende des
When the process is finished, you can take the carrier substance out of the unit.
Analog
The process is the same for a liquid carrier substance. We recommend that you shake the remedy you've produced thoroughly 10 times, as is usual in homeopathy.
kräftig aufschütteln. Darüber hinaus bietet dieser Bereich
This area of the software, where you can homeopathize neutral carrier substances, also gives you the option of making a direct homeopathic copy of a source substance. For example, I'm now putting coriander tincture into the input cup. Now you choose a carrier substance again, either a water alcohol solution or globules, and put it in the output cup. Choose the function for imprinting the carrier substance. This time, click on the Copy button. You can choose whether you want to make a one-to-one copy of the source substance or enter a potency. In this example, we'll enter a potency. Click in the Enter Potency to Use field and enter, for example, D30. Now you can start the process, and a copy of the source substance you've created in the unit will be made on the carrier substance. However, it's important to realize that you can only copy the pure information content of the source substance and not the chemical structure. This process is particularly useful in combination with allopathic medications. You can homeopathize allopathic remedies, in particular for detoxification processes, and create individual preparations for the patient to take. For example, if the patient is taking cortisone, you can homeopathize the cortisone preparation using this process. The patient can then take this homeopathized medicine alongside the cortisone preparation in order to reduce the side effects. The final method of transmitting the healing information to the patient is the hand pads mentioned in part 1 of the video. We have 2 pads that are connected to the Mars 3 unit using a special cable. I'd like to show you the process now. This is the cable which we use to connect the main pad to the AUX 2 port on the back of the Mars 3.
Mit dem Mars 3 verbunden. Auf der Rückseite an den AUX 1 Anschluss. Und dann werden die beiden
Then you connect the 2 hand pads together with a cinch cable.
Cinch-Kabel verbunden.
You can now ask the patient to sit near the unit and put both his or her palms on the hand pads. Then you send the information you've selected to the pads. To do this, click on the Broadcasting icon. Stay in the Instant Broadcasting tab and enter the time information. You can set the number of cycles, the length of the pause between the 2 cycles, and the length of one cycle. Then you must check the AUX box at the bottom, so that the information isn't transmitted remotely, but is sent to the hand pads connected to the unit. To start the broadcasting process, simply click on Broadcast. The patient puts his hands on the pads and receives the information. The status of the broadcast process is shown on the screen. An alarm sounds to indicate that the broadcasting process has finished. In the third part of the video, we'd like to show you some of the special features of the Mars 3. In particular, we want to focus on the heart of the product, the database. I'd like to show you how you can add information to the database and exchange data with your colleagues. Unlike other systems on the market, the Mars 3 allows you to exchange the rates and data you've created with your colleagues. To see how this works, we'll go into the database module. First of all, you'll see an overview of the data which we provide with the product for testing purposes. This data includes acupuncture, allergy tests, flower essences, homeopathy, nutrition, of course all the organ systems, teeth, viral, bacterial and fungal burdens, and different nosodes, amongst many other things.
Bis hin zu Z wie Zähne. Insgesamt liefern wir Ihnen
We provide a total of 12,000 different rates, which means that you have a complete system that will meet most of your medicinal requirements.
medizinischen Anforderungen abdecken können. Sie können diese vorhandenen Daten jedoch selbst erweitern.
You can add to the existing data yourself. There are 3 ways of doing this.
Zum einen, Sie können
Firstly, you can put rates provided by external suppliers into the system.
eingeben. Sie können selbst
Secondly, you can enter rates yourself by using the name, for example, of a test substance. These are so-called word rates. You also have the option of generating rates from these names.
Und die dritte Möglichkeit ist,
Thirdly, you can scan in substances in the same way as we did in part 2 of the video when we copied substances. So here too, you can save substance information in the database.
Datenbank einzuspeichern. Beginnen wir damit, eine neue Rate.
Let's start by adding a new rate. Simply click on the Add User Rate button at the top of the window.
Können wir
You can choose whether the rate is neutral, male or female, and then you enter the name of the rate.
für die Rate ein. Ich nehme jetzt
I'll use the coriander tincture as an example again.
wie gesagt,
As I mentioned, you can get the rate for coriander tincture from an external supplier, perhaps over the internet. As an example, I'll enter 3456. There's an information field where you can enter additional information. For example, what the coriander tincture can be used for.
diese Infos können dann auch auf den Protokollen mit ausgedruckt
Finally, you simply save the data you've entered and it's included in the database.
werden, in meiner Datenbank einsortiert. Die zweite Möglichkeit
The
ist,
second option is to have the system generate a rate from the term coriander tincture. Once again, you click on the Add User Rate button at the top of the window. Enter the term coriander tincture, and the system will identify the appropriate rate for the tincture using isosophy, also known as numerology.
Numerologie, die entsprechende Rate für die Koriandertinktur finden. Auch die
You can then save this new rate in your database.
und die dritte Möglichkeit
The third option is to scan in the coriander tincture.
der Koriandertinktur. Ich gebe
I put it in the unit's input cup and click on the Add Scanned Remedy button.
Substanz scannen. Hier wird nun genau
The radiation of the coriander tincture is recorded for 10 seconds in just the same way as with the patient witness.
Tinktur vorgenommen. Ich löse den Prozess
I
aus.
start the process and the coriander tincture, in other words the information it contains, is scanned in.
Anschließend
Then you can enter a name for the rate. This time I'll enter coriander tincture scanned.
Scan.
You can also enter additional information at this point, and then you can save the new rate in your database.
In meiner Datenbank ab. Nun haben wir unsere drei
We
verschiedenen
now have 3 different rates, or 3 different pieces of test information for coriander tincture in the database. You can sort these items, and you can enter your own umbrella term. To do this, click on the Add User Rate button at the top of the window, enter My Tinctures.
Gebe diesmal als Rate 0 ein.
This time enter 0 as the rate, and choose to have the value stored in the topmost level of the database.
Sortiert werden soll. Und nun kann ich meine ganzen eigenen Raten
Now, you can include all your own rates under this umbrella term. As you may already have noticed, the database has a tree structure. This means that all the umbrella terms, such as acupuncture, allergy tests, and flower essences, are at the top level of the hierarchy. By clicking on the plus symbol, you can open each branch. For example, under acupuncture, you can see the individual meridians, such as the bladder meridian and the large intestine meridian.
Blasenmeridian.
If you click on the plus symbol again, for example, next to the large intestine meridian, you'll see the individual points for the large intestine meridian.
Diese Weise ist die gesamte
The whole database is structured in the same way. This gives you a relatively clear overview of a large number of parameters.
Ein großer Vorteil des Mars 3
One major benefit of the Mars 3 radionics system is the fact that you can create your own templates from the information you've entered in the database.
Nun, was bedeutet das?
What does that mean?
Dass etwa
For example, if around 80% of the patients who are suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome have a burden of palladium, mercury, and perhaps Candida albicans, you can create your own template for chronic fatigue syndrome, which includes these parameters.
Testvorlage erstellen, in der Sie genau diese Parameter einsortieren.
I'd like to show you how this works. First of all, you must go to the Templates area. There you'll find the templates that we supply with the system and that we worked with in Part 1 and Part 2 of the video. Here you can add your own templates. First of all, click on New Template and enter a name for the template. I'm going to use the term CFS, which stands for Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. Now in the left-hand area of the window, you can choose which rates you want to include and test in this CFS template. You can enter a search term in the field at the bottom of the window. Start with palladium. The system has found the entry and you simply click on this button to add the rate to the template list. Next, you should search for mercury. The system has also found this entry and once again you add it to the template list by clicking on the arrow button. The third parameter is Candida albicans. Now you've created a chronic fatigue syndrome template with the entries palladium, mercury and Candida albicans. You can open this template from the test wizard and test to find out which burdens the patient who is suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome has. You can also export these templates or individual combinations and make them available to your colleagues. This applies in particular to rates you've created or scanned in yourself. For example, you can add the rate for coriander tincture, which you created earlier, to this template and give your colleagues access to the rate. Another feature of the database module is the clipboard. Unlike the templates, the clipboard is a temporary storage place for information from the database. If you want to create a specific homeopathic remedy, for example sulfur D30, you can select sulfur in the database, put it in the clipboard, and from there create a remedy with a potency of D30 in the projections module. Or if you want to test everything to do with the stomach for one particular patient, you can find all the information in the database which has a connection with the stomach and put it in the clipboard. You can access the clipboard from the test wizard. Now I'd like to show you how this works. Let's assume that we want to create sulfur D30. In the database, click on the Find button and enter sulfur in the field. Using drag and drop, put the sulfur entry into the clipboard. Now you enter the potency you want. In this example, D30. If you press the return key on the keyboard now, the information is added to the clipboard. Click on the projection button. Now you can imprint the sulfur D30 onto globules or an alcohol water solution, as we've already seen. The second way in which you can use the clipboard is, for example, to search for all the entries which have a connection with the stomach and store them in the clipboard. Once again, I'd like to show you how this works. This time, search for stomach. Open the clipboard again. Now you can delete the sulfur entry and drag and drop the first stomach-related entry that you found onto the clipboard. Under Find, click on Find Next. Take the next stomach entry and add it to the clipboard. Go back to Find Next, take the third entry, and so on. You can then open the clipboard from the test wizard and use the analysis functions for testing, as we've already demonstrated.
Eine weitere einzigartige
Another unique feature of the system is the so-called medical references. You can use these to link entries in the database to one another.
Nehmen wir zum Beispiel an, wir haben beim
For example, let's assume that you found an organ with a burden in the course of a test. You can use the medical references to find out which virus, bacterium or parasite the organ is burdened with.
Parasit dieses Organ belastet ist. Die Definition der
You can access the medical references function from inside the database module. We've already entered a number of references. To show you how this works, I'll click on the Medical References button and then on Tools to display all the references.
Lassen wir hier alle Bezüge anzeigen. Dieser Bereich wird momentan
Experienced users are in the process of extending this area. Just as with the templates, you can export the medical references you've created and make them available to your colleagues.
Ich definiere hier einfach
All you need to do is to define the test values which act as references to the organ group that you've selected in the upper part of the window.
die dazu in Bezug stehen sollen. Als Beispiel
Let's take the lymphatic system as an example. When you select the lymphatic system in the top part of the window and then click on the lymph nodes, you'll see the illnesses and nosodes that we've assigned to the lymph nodes in the lower part of the window. Of course, when we developed the Mars 3, we also had traditional radionics practitioners in mind, prefer to work with a pendulum, a rod or a rubbing plate. For this reason, we've included a rubbing plate in the Mars 3, which means that you can carry out manual tests.
dazu gehe ich wieder in
To do this, open the test wizard again.
den Bereich
Choose the main test area and you'll find that there's a tab where you can select templates for manual testing.
Testung auswählen kann. Ich nehme jetzt mal
In this example, choose the organ test.
kopiere mir die
Copy all the entries into the lower part of the window and start the manual test. Now you can rub on the rubbing plate to find out whether or not there's a burden in the highlighted area. For example, the gland system.
Belastung oder nicht. Wenn ich auf der Reibefläche
If you get a stick reaction on the rubbing plate, you'll know that there is a burden on the gland system.
bestätige
You confirm this by pressing the Yes button.
dann, wenn ich noch
If you press the button again, the rate will appear on the Mars 3 display.
zeigt,
Now you can find out whether the burden on the gland system is an overfunction or an underfunction.
Überfunktion oder
You start with the question, is it an overfunction? You can find out by rubbing the plate whether the answer is yes or no. In this case, there's no stick reaction, so you press the No button. The question, is it an underfunction, appears automatically. This time you get a stick reaction, which means that you should press the Yes button to confirm that it is an underfunction. Now you can use the dial to find out the strength of the underfunction. Starting at 0, you gradually turn the dial in the minus direction in increments of 0.5 points until you get a stick reaction. For example, in this case, at -7. This means that the gland system has an underfunction of -7. You confirm this again by pressing the Yes button. The system then automatically opens the tree, and you can test to find out which area of the gland system has a burden. Is it the glands in general? Is it the endocrine glands? Is it the endocrine secretion? And so on.
diese Möglichkeit
The option of using manual testing with the Mars 3 opens up a whole new range of possibilities for kinesiologists in particular. For example, in the range type option, you have the choice of a straightforward yes-no display.
Wir können die Taster Ja und Nein
You can also press the yes and no buttons using a foot switch connected to the back of the unit.
das an der Rückseite des Gerätes angeschlossen wird. Und ich habe nun
This means that when you select, for example, the organ test template, you can sit the patient down in front of you.
vor mich hinzustellen. Soll eine Hand auf
The patient must put one hand on the handpad, and you can then run a kinesiological test.
eine positive
Do you get a positive or a negative reaction? You can move through the individual parameters simply by pressing yes or no using the foot switch.
Reaktion.
If the reaction is positive, you confirm by pressing the yes button, and the result is included in the results list. If you get a negative reaction, you confirm this by pressing the no button, and the unit moves to the next parameter.
Und zum Schluss dieses
To bring this third part of the video to a close, we now have a very special highlight.
dass Sie größere
If you need to imprint larger quantities of carrier substances, for example for agricultural purposes or for use in environmental protection or in a large animal practice, you can connect a larger cup to the Mars 3. This will allow you to imprint up to half a kilo of carrier substance at a time.
einem halben Kilogramm einer Trägersubstanz informiert werden kann. Die Vorgehensweise ist genau
The process is exactly the same as you've already seen for imprinting the normal small quantities of carrier substances in the output cup. You simply put the carrier substance in the output cup and select the information in the projections module. After that, you start the imprinting process. The large cup is connected to the AUX2 port using a special cable. The cup has its own power supply and a separate power cable. We hope that you found this video useful. If you'd like to recommend it to your colleagues, you can play it at any time at video.google.com or of course at www.copen.de. Harold, are there any closing words?
Ja, ich hoffe, dass
I hope that we've covered everything that you need to know, and I'd just like to wish you every success with your Copen Mars 3 Radionics system. And now we'd both like to say goodbye.
Auf Wiedersehen.